For more on the rest of the day's top political stories, let's bring in CBS senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Good to see you, Ed. President Biden just wrapped up a meeting with Colombia's president where he designated the South American country a non-NATO ally. What's the significance of that?
Good to see you, Nicole. Yeah, this is a sort of a chink in the armor of countries around the world as they get this status. Essentially grants them military allyship at a level somewhat similar to those that are in the NATO alliance, which is considered the supreme military alliance that the United States is a member of. Brazil and Argentina are the only two other countries in the Western Hemisphere that have this. Given the large U.S. military presence in that country for years and its work with the United States across administrations on a host of issues, including anti-drug missions, dealing with the situation in Venezuela, especially in recent years, this was not a surprise distinction given to a country that's become a pretty important partner in South America, especially as so many other governments there, whether it's Brazil, Nicaragua, Cuba, across the hemisphere, turn back towards authoritarian regimes or continue with theirs. Colombia has been seen for a long time by multiple administrations by both parties. It's a pretty strong democracy and economy in the region that's pretty tight with the United States.
I know you've been doing some reporting on the Biden administration's recent talks with Venezuela on energy as it tries to isolate Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Did that come up in this meeting with the Colombian leader?
Unclear so far, but we know that it was something that they were concerned about because millions of Venezuelans have crossed into Colombia over the last several years amid the political strife in that country, especially since 2019 when Nicolas Maduro really started cracking down. In fact, the Colombian president today said he's been in touch with some of those Baltic states in Europe about what it's like to suddenly get an influx of refugees and some thoughts and tips on how to do that, how to absorb them into your society, how to prepare for them logistically, because it has been a major migrant crisis in this hemisphere that doesn't get as much attention but has put a big strain on Colombia. We know now, according to U.S. officials, that the conversations that went on in Venezuela over the weekend had more to do with the release of those hostages than about oil, and that there was no quid pro quo. Give us the hostages, we'll drop the oil embargo on you, and we'll consider putting you back on the global market. Insisting that these are months-long talks in an attempt to get the now 7 that are left behind Americans that are being held hostage or detained in Venezuela illegally in the view of the United States, and that any conversation about opening up global oil supply with countries that we may or may not have strong diplomatic relations with continue on a separate path and at a different timetable. But of course the timing this past weekend was suspect because the United States is known to be going around the world wondering where can we get more energy supply, not only for the United States, but most especially for Europe, which has been so reliant on Russian oil. And with the talks continuing with Iran regarding its nuclear ambitions, with outreach by the Biden administration to the Saudis, for example, to boost their supply, going to Venezuela as well was seen perhaps as a signal that the U.S. is getting serious about reopening their markets as well.
Now, turning to some other delicate discussions, Vice President Harris is in Poland, but she seemed to walk a fine line on a Polish proposal to provide fighter jets to Ukraine. What's the latest on that effort?
Well, in essence, the Pentagon has said it's not doable, and that not only from a logistical standpoint, but out of concern that it could provoke Russia, the United States is not going to be part of this. And that essentially poured cold water on it, pulled the plug from it, whichever metaphor you prefer. It's not happening. The issue was that the Polish wanted to transfer some of its old MiG aircraft, Soviet-made MiG aircraft, to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, and essentially have the Ukrainians pick it up from there and fly it into Ukraine. But the concern developed through U.S. intelligence is that that would be seen by Russia as a direct escalation of the conflict and direct engagement by the United States in this. It's almost as if the MiGs became a hot potato. Poland offered them and then realized, oh, shoot, if we do that, the Russians are going to get upset about this and they might come for us when they're next door in Ukraine anyway. And so they said, how about the U.S. take them? The U.S. said, no, we can't take them either. Because if you do this, it's going to provoke, essentially, or could provoke World War III. And so there was a decision to hold this off. It's being sort of written off now by U.S. officials as a bit of a miscommunication because the Poles were seen to get out ahead of their skis in making this suggestion without consulting completely with the United States. Even though last weekend, Secretary of State Blinken was saying on Face the Nation, and other officials were saying that, look, if something like that could be worked out, where an ongoing push to get military equipment into Ukraine was possible, okay. The problem is military fighter aircraft, whether it's Soviet-made, whether it's US F-16s, is seen now considered to be way too direct a contribution and a potential escalation that, of course, everybody's trying to avoid.
And before we let you go, I want to turn to some news about North Korea's recent missile launches. What are you learning?
Well, the United States now says that 2 missile tests conducted in late February and early March were a, quote, serious escalation, unquote, of North Korea's nuclear missile test ambitions, because these devices that were fired into the air, let's put it that way, were seen to be what they say are ICBM capable, intercontinental ballistic missile capable, meaning capable of eventually carrying a nuclear missile and attacking somewhere else. This assessment was done in consultation with Japan and South Korea, of course, the 2 Asian countries most at risk from a nuclear attack or any kind of missile attack by North Korea. The information has been shared with the United Nations, and the administration says they're putting this out there out of concern for what North Korea is trying to do, out of concern that they could be months, if not just a few years away from fully developing this nuclear technology to a point where it's just, untenable and unacceptable to the world. And by putting this information out there, they're trying to build pressure on the North Koreans to talk to the United States about winding this down and figuring out a solution. Remember, the Biden administration has said, and they reiterated this today in telling us reporters about this situation, that they're willing to meet with the North Korean regime without precondition to discuss the situation, but attempts to do that have been ignored or rebuffed by Kim Jong-un and his government. But by raising this issue today, again, trying to raise public awareness about it, trying to get the United Nations involved to put some diplomatic pressure on North Korea, and signaling to the world, in essence, we've got Ukraine, we've got the situation with Russia, and now we may have another issue at the other end of Asia that continues to sort of lag on the world as North Korea does this unexpectedly and in quite dramatic fashion.
Yeah, a lot of global developments to follow. Ed O'Keefe, thank you.